Hi everybody and welcome to the last live in our series Conversations with Artists. Revolv is going to take a little break for a month, but we have some exciting artists taking over in August. We will come back in autumn and we would really appreciate it if you told us whether you enjoyed this live series and maybe if you have any ideas of what you'd like to see next. It would be great to hear from you. Great to see people joining. Today, I, Laura Bivolaru, will be speaking to my colleague and friend Krasimira Butseva. We will be talking about artistic research, some post-graduation strategies to research, and how to just have a bit of fun and be playful with artistic research. So I'm going to invite Krasimira now. I have invited Krasimira. I hope she joins soon. Hello, friend.
Hey Laura, how are you doing?
All right, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Just warm as usual.
Where are you joining from?
I'm joining from Sofia, Bulgaria, and it's I think like 38 degrees here, so that's all I can say.
Well,
What about you?
London had its fair share of a heat wave last week, and I think I speak for everybody when I say that I'm glad it's over. So today we will be speaking about artistic research, and maybe until more people join, we can start speaking about when we found out what this research is. What the hell does it mean? You want to go first?
Yeah, totally. I think it's in a way my kind of a ready reply to this would be when I started university, but I think that's probably not the truth. Maybe that's the first conscious time I knew that, I was introduced to research. Before that, I was probably still doing some research within, doing some work like photography outside of any education when I was young. But I think pretty much the first time was when I started a BA photography degree in the University of Portsmouth, and I was given like kind of a topic to do like a project on, and probably I heard the word research then, and like it was very like new and kind of hard to understand what does that even mean.
Yeah, I got very lucky during secondary school because I had a history teacher who made us do academic research like well before you should probably start doing academic research, and he for assignments he made us write some papers, and I actually got to present to a conference. How funny is that? Very early on. But at uni, I actually really struggled with artistic research. I think I struggled understanding its benefits. I guess I thought research was trying to find artists that do the same thing as you in order to justify your practice. And that was the wrong way to think about it. I realized later on. So it just made me, go around in circles and seeing more and more of the same type of work. And it was only later on that I realized that's not research, actually. Research should be looking at a variety of artists, a variety of fields, and actually getting you a bit challenged, I think.
I suppose it's still research, but it's probably not productive research, if that could even be said as a term. And I think it's just the expectation that you need to see something that like it's done before like yours to kind of justify what you're doing. And you often think that research is about, of course, research is about justifying, something, like something that the work is trying to communicate or something that you are trying to communicate, but in a very like different way, like I suppose more layered way rather than just as like singular example or several.
So for you, for example, how important would you say research is for your practice?
It's the most important thing. I don't even think I make work. I just research things and then I call them work. That's my practice basically. And I love it. I enjoy it. I prefer to, like, I think that I often, for example, with photography, I would often document things. I won't call them photographs, or they would never like be in a project or exist as the way that they were like captured. But they would be simply a documentation of a space, and I would work then with this documentation towards something else. So this would be like one way to do research, for example, for me. And I think that because my work, same as yours, are very grounded within like historical narratives. So I suppose research is quite important when you speak about history or sociology or like anything that's somehow grounded within reality, and it's not necessarily concerning you directly. It's not your personal experience. You are kind of representing or recreating specific events or specific time periods or specific political regime. So I suppose that I'm very cautious and always like, I used to be, I suppose, before quite worried about representation or misrepresentation. Um,
Mm.
I'm still worried about that, but I suppose because I've spent like quite a few years dealing with the same subject matter, I kind of feel comfortable there. And what about you?
I think it's a huge part, exactly like you were saying. If you're working with history, you have to be aware of, the facts, the events that happened, on one hand, but on the other hand, of how these events were theorized, how they were already written about. I think to me, that's probably the most important, like being aware of how one historical event can actually be thought of in very different terms by different people. That's really interesting to make work about. Um, but yeah, I think when you make work, when you even take a photograph, it's almost like that's your point of view, that's your opinion on a subject. And if you were in conversation with a friend, you wouldn't express an opinion about a subject that you knew nothing about, right? And it's the
Yeah.
same with making work. You have to know what you're talking about to get your point across.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's always like space for ignorance, especially if you are just starting to make some work, just like kind of believing that you know what you're doing and not really seeing the point of research. And I think I was actually thinking about how, and speaking yesterday to a close friend about research, actually, he's an academic, and we were talking how often like research and practice are completely divided. They're like on the two like sides, and you often think that you have to do one and then do the other, or do start with the work then find the justification, or the other around, when actually it's like they're inseparable, they're the same thing. But it's kind of hard to grasp upon that initially, I think, especially when you start to make work and you start to delve within like different subject matters which exist before you probably were even born, and you have quite a complex like history, even if it's not looking specifically at historical events.
But actually, you do teach early career artists at LCC. What are some of the challenges they come across when they start learning about research, or when they start hearing that you have to do research for your project?
I think that they, same as me when I was starting, we were very resilient to research. It's like you wouldn't actually see instantly the point, or it would just feel like something that's totally disconnected from taking the photograph or thinking about the photograph and making the work. So I think it's also like, I think that kind of a, not stereotype, but I know how to explain it, but just thinking that research is just reading books and reading like things that are, very heavy theory based. Or, for example, I think some of the challenges is like one of the challenges is definitely that, like sitting and reading something that is from the field of sociology, for example, and like finding the imagination whilst you read the text in order to like understand how that links after in the aftermath with your work or with the way that you want to represent something. And I think the other thing is exactly as like what we started speaking about the way that you search for photographers that do the work that you do, but searching only for these kinds of photographers. And whenever you get, a photographer or an artist that's doing something slightly different, you would feel like it may not be, the right research because it's different. And you clearly think that, it should be all exactly the same field, exactly the same methodology of working or processes as well.
Yeah, and I guess it's the same with theory, because I want to give an example from my own experience here. But when I started thinking about this historical period in Romania, that's called the transition period, and it's from when Romania transitioned from communism to capitalism and democracy. And my starting point was communism is bad, and what happened was very, very bad. And this is a very biased point. It keeps you from, opening up your sources, opening up your artistic resources, because many artists, for example, have collaborated with the communist regime. What do you make of that work? Do you entirely forget about it, or do you take it into consideration, and so on? I think, yeah, I don't know how you totally escape bias, but definitely a start would be maybe to expose yourself to points of view that are different from yours. But that's a real challenge.
Yeah, and
Right.
also not all points are necessarily right. That's like a very big statement I'm throwing there, but I think you kind of know what I mean. In terms of the artist from communism you mentioned, yeah, I think that's a really good like example of how, for example, during like the regime, you have to be employed by the state. You can't just produce work on your own. So even if you have an idea and you want to like create something, or you want to work towards something, it always needs to be within the framework set by the regime in like beforehand, and it should always fit there, which for me it's beyond fascinating, because limitations are the best. Like they actually push you further and make you think very creatively in very unexpected ways. In terms of like looking at artists who deal with painting or sculpture, or even looking at people who writers, for example, who write like fictional books and short stories from that specific time. And it's really interesting. Like I've been reading some Bulgarian literature in the past months, and all of the books I've been reading have been published during communism. They are all fictional. They're all like away from politics, but there is always like kind of a very thin, element that's like crossing through the whole book or through the whole story, which is quite political. And it almost feels like that's added there, like it's just pasted on top of a specific part, rather than it goes around these values or ethics or morals. And it's interesting because I just try to imagine whether that was what the editor of this book told the writer, that there isn't enough, of this or that, or whether it was just how like you already know the framework and you just have to work within it. I suppose both things would happen or have happened.
So in your work, do you know how this happens? When you research something, for example, a theory, how does it get translated in artwork? Is it like a magical process, or do you have a recipe, a strategy for that?
Both. It's magic for sure. But the recipe, I think it's just have enough time to reflect on things. I think that always helps to, for example, I would spend some time reading, and then I would like give myself some time to stay away from everything so I could kind of connect all my thoughts. But for example, last year I was doing this work for Sofia History Museum, which was about a specific like action that state security, which is the secret police of the communist regime, undertook in 1958. So they basically were doing this kind of a like procedure to arrest people who are all like young. They were all between 20 and 30. They were all like artists or journalists or people studying in higher education in Sofia and like in the district. So they were like all arrested for listening to Western music, and also to because of the way that they looked, they were wearing like tight trousers or like short skirts. Or they were having their hair in ponytails. So all of these things, and I think with this body of work, because actually the work wasn't, it was about the specific case, but because I'm very interested in spaces and the way that they communicate the past, and I think what comes across through all my work is whether we need to have like the historical knowledge before we go to a specific location to actually understand its past, or we could just, you know, be present and activate it somehow. More like this kind of a question that has no answer. So when I was doing this work, so it was actually about the building where they were arrested. And I was reading at that point, listening to images by Tina Kampf, and how like she speaks about the way that images resonate and vibrate, and how we could hear them, or how we can hear nothing, like we could hear the silence. And I was going to the archives here in Bulgaria and Sofia, and I was looking at the case file from the specific operation, and I was looking at the images of the people who were arrested. The whole file is quite kind of censored, like there are parts missing, which were destroyed through the years. For example, you don't even need to know about like political censorship or a purge of the archives, which happened here in the early 90s, to notice this, because you see a case file with 56 photographs, but only like 30 like sheets of paper about the photographs. So like some information is missing. You don't really know who some of the people are, even if their names are there. There's no explanation of why they were arrested. However, so I was just looking at these photographs and like spending time kind of trying to understand images, which don't have much happening in them. Like they're kind of a typical kind of a portrait, like a full body shot of someone standing next to like a wall. So I was just analyzing the space and kind of trying to solve where the images were taken, and thinking a lot about the way that the photographs were clearly taken in the same building where the people were arrested, which is actually not a jail. It's not, you know, it's actually a governmental administrative building used for people to just go to work and do admin. And what's interesting is how actually the photographer of these images was actually probably an agent who worked there, who arrested these people. So I was very interested in the gaze of the subjects of these individuals towards the photographer, because we all know about, you know, the dynamics or links between the photographer and the person that's being photographed. But here it felt like it's much more extreme, and it's like doubled so many layers of the way that the person gazes back at the camera. Of course, you know, it's all my imagination there, and how I understand that. But I think this book and the way that Tina Kamp speaks about like the noise of the images, like, was quite interesting to connect to looking at these files. I don't know if that answers the question even.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and you touched on something that is really important, which I think is imagination. You know, you read a book and it might be just so heavy and dry on the theory, but the way you imagine that and connect it to real life is really, really important to the artwork. So I think it's definitely possible to take something really dry and philosophical and make like really good work out of it. And we also spoke about, this practice as research thing where your research is ongoing on a subject, and then the artwork is the research in a sense. So like you don't boil down the research to a single piece or a series of pieces, but then you actually combine different research strands, and that's the work. Can you give an example from your practice when you did that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just maybe speak a little bit about the same work, which actually was at the end like 3 films and like an installation of images. But one of the films was literally like an essay I wrote from the things that I was reading related to the history of the space. So, for example, who was the architect that built this building, what year was built, like this very dry information about the space itself and how it changed through all the years, what was housed inside the space, what is housed now. Then I go into another part where I speak about the way that this operation was run by state security, the people that arrested, like how it all happened. Again, with like the exact specific number of people arrested and years and months and so on. And then the last part is the silence or noise of the images, but also thinking about the memory of buildings and the cracks. For example, a crack in a building, how it could move for years until it cracks, or how some air stuck between the paint of the wall could be there again for many years, and like all these things that buildings carry within themselves without even any kind of a living presence that inhabits them. And I think because I kind of struggle with pushing research far from the work, I feel like it's occupying a very big part of the work. So I'm allowing it. I'm giving research the space. Research could have the space in the work. So I think this essay was like running on top of a film, and the film was like images I've taken inside of this building, in the basements, which were used for arrest and beating, and outside of the building as well. And the images were actually on purpose developed really badly. The negatives were like scratched, and I've peeled some parts of like the images itself, which were linking back to like this series of memory, and also like parts missing, and also like Hito's like famous quote and book where like she would say how images which are not like the direct image or the poor image, and how images of events which have not been kind of resolved and have came to some kind of a resolution are always poor images, because they can never represent this thing, because it's still moving, it's not static, it has not found an end. So I feel like with this silly process of like, kind of scratching the film, destroying it on purpose, and then in the film zooming in super close, so you only see kind of fractions of something, which sometimes it appears as a whole image, but often it's just super abstract. But having this kind of a essay run on top, very intense, probably really hard to read, so much information. I think that was, kind of allowing the research to be even more heavily occupying the scene than the actual work itself. And what about you? Like, can you tell us about an example from your practice as well, where research kind of steals the work?
I think, I was working on a project that it was very personal. It started from my own family, actually. It was meant to find out the truth about the identity of my great-grandfather, because my grandfather passed away when my dad was still quite young, so I never got to know him, and my family didn't really talk about him much. So the project was me combining different research threads. I I spoke to my family, kind of gathering accounts of my grandfather, but also kind of speculations of who might his father have been, because he was born during the war, so and out of wedlock as well. So obviously it was a very particular time in history during the Second World War. Right, so I was speaking to my family. I took a DNA test. I researched like what was happening in the area at the time historically, because the Soviet army had invaded that part of Romania. So it was really interesting to see like exactly where the army had been. Could he have been the son of maybe a German soldier? Because Germany had been in that part of Romania before the Soviet army had invaded the area. So it was like a really interesting topic. And as I was doing more research, it evolved into a book dummy. And then I decided to stop it because I realized there were some things I had like some ethical problems with. Like I started asking myself, you know, if my family hasn't spoken about this in a long time, maybe there's a reason for that, and maybe it's not worth it to go and kind of stir this discussion. So I decided to, like, you know, not continue with the project. But the way it was going, it was basically a book dummy that compiled all this research as it was happening.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to, like, you know, the other big question about ethics when doing research, ethics when doing, like, you know, photography in general, and in this sense, like taking into account the individuals who are a part of the work, who the work could be directed towards. You could be telling their story, or they could be, you know, physically and bodily part of the work. And yet it's you, the artist, photographer, researcher, narrating other people's stories, and the dynamics again are very, you know, kind of heavy. They could be heavy, or like things could escalate to like specific directions that you may not like. I think often people have very genuine and very good, like, kind of a way of working. I mean, they don't mean what could eventually escalate from the work, which could be like quite problematic, for example, and like thousands of cases like that in like art history, if we look back, and even if we look close as well.
It's very difficult, and I'm really sad that ethics is mainly in photography, mainly associated with photojournalism. You know, like other professions, like as you mentioned, sociologists, journalists, they deal with ethics in their training. They have some guidelines, some advice about how they should be going out in the world and speak to people. Um, and photographers don't really. I think that would be really useful.
Yeah, I think we've had this conversation before. It's actually been like a frustrating conversation where you don't like, that's not, it's almost like one of these taboo topics. I think this goes hand by hand with the other topic of how to apply for funding, which again remains a taboo in the art world and education as well. But yeah, I think it's super important to like have awareness, and yeah, it's often stays in photojournalism, and I still think that it yet doesn't occupy as much space that it should probably do. And I think working with people as well, like when, like some years ago when I was doing like, you know, first time doing research, but like not first time, but like having a period of time to actually do field trips and like interviews and meet with like dozens of people for like several months and focus only on that. I think it was like difficult as an experience as well, like in the sense that the things that I was doing was in fact meeting with people who were survivors, who have been sent to forced labor camps in Bulgaria during the communist regime, or relatives of people, and even like stepping away from ethics, but also thinking about the way that you handle these things, like how do you work with trauma, like how do you preserve the individuals you work with, how do you preserve yourself when you're an artist, you're not a trained like a psychiatrist or someone who has expertise in this field and knows how to manage the situation, which has two like sides, which are quite like, again, they could escalate.
It's incredibly difficult, but I don't want to get all serious about it because I think there's some fun aspects of artistic research, in the sense that you have a little bit more freedom, don't you, than other professions, and you can actually interpret what research is to you and your practice. And you can read a book, you can go to an exhibition, or I don't know, all these like traditional ways of researching, but you can also do other activities and they would count as research to your subject. And I think probably the craziest thing I've done as research was when I was on my BA and I finally decided that I actually am interested in Romania and Romanian history and the Romanian society, because until then I kind of like wanted to avoid it and hide my identity as a Romanian, immigrant in the UK. And I got really interested in this immigrant condition and wanted to do work about that for my major project. And I wanted to know more about what Romanian, this stereotype of the Romanian immigrant. So I got a job as a cleaner, and I truly experienced what it is to have probably the lowest job on the payroll and be seen as an immigrant. It wasn't actually that bad. People were really nice, and my clients were really nice. And I photographed into my clients' homes for this project. But I think that's probably, the farthest I went with my research. What about you?
I think this project is one of my favorites, actually not of you, but in general, just because of how, like, I mean, here, like this links to like practice as research or like visual research in general, and how you go around these things. But also I truly love this project because it's the ways I created and how the images are actually taken with a camera hidden inside of a pen. So it, like, I think I really love this work. And then back to how you started talking, I want to just say how whenever I present myself in front of people who don't know me yet, so basically whenever I do talk about my work, I always say that I'm an artist, I'm not a historian, thankfully. Like, I'm really happy that I'm not a historian because you could have all of this freedom to think, to create, to interpret, to, it's so much more liberating. I think that, like, I totally love history and historians. They're great, like, in general, but it's like quite limiting because I could, speak about this history and like read it and spend like hours doing this research, and yet the result could be so much more exciting than an article in an academic journal, which I also really love in terms of reading or writing. But I think that there is something that can't quite happen there as it could happen in your visual practice in art. I think that the furthest I've gone is, I don't know, I think I always go far. But for example, I now am remembering how when I was doing this work about the forced labor camps, initially I was visiting locations. So I was visiting camps. But because there is very scattered history, fragmented, and when you start to work with within such a topic in Bulgaria specifically, it's quite difficult until you find your feet and understand who to read, what to read actually, and what's truthful, because there's a lot of things that aren't truthful but are actually history, which could be another thing we speak about later. So I was doing this work and I was going to these locations, which often I didn't know where they are. I had like very rough coordinates of a city or a village, but not exact space or anything. Like, and there are no signifiers most of the times when you go to these spaces. There are these sublime, beautiful landscapes or like something like that. So you have no idea whether you're at the right place. And I think so furthest I've gone is going to like field trip, visiting the space, not knowing where it is, being in a car with like someone that I've just met who has agreed to drive me and someone who's friends with this guy. And we're like going to this mine. So we're driving in this mine. There are like many signs saying stay out, forbidden for like, you know, people that don't work here. But we keep driving, of course, and we meet someone from the mine in their truck who comes to like, you know, kind of tell us to leave. Like, what are we doing here? We're like trespassing, actually. We are actually trespassing here. But he asks us like, what are you doing? And I'm saying that, we've heard that there is like a view here, like somewhere around that you can see the whole town. And we're really like trying to find this view. And then the man tells us, like, if you continue on this road and you take a left, you like reach this kind of a hill and you'll see the whole like, you know, kind of a mine, and then the town. But if you continue on the right, which you shouldn't do, it's like the old mine. And then he starts giving us like historical overview of the whole space. And I'm like, this is like the best, you know, I can't get this information from any other source, like books or documents, only from like, you know, meeting this person there who wants to like tell us to leave. But of course we go right and we reach this space, which is the kind of an approximate location of where the camp was. I think that's far, maybe, this story.
But also an exciting thing that's been happening lately is um, finding resources on social media, and I think that totally counts as research, even if, you know, it feels like you're just scrolling Facebook. But I've kind of curated my Facebook in such a way, and I'm following these people. And some of them speak about the 90s in Romania quite a lot. And they would like randomly post something on a Sunday morning where they recall an event from like their childhood or their teenage years. And to me, that, you know, following this person and paying attention to their posts is totally research. Like, I have an artistic and a sociological interest in what they have to say, even if it's just Facebook.
No, totally. I wrote like a paper actually about a few things, but like a section of it is my observation of Facebook profiles of people and the way that they curate them to remind of memorial museums, and how I'm suggesting a theory that like these profiles, for example, imitate a memorial museum in the way that they're like archive images, contemporary images, the texts that are written, but also like other stories that come from other people, which are again like posted on their walls, and how you can get this kind of a quite large glimpse of a specific period or a specific event by looking at the content that they post. So that's totally, and another thing just to add is that I actually started this whole project on Facebook. I didn't know anyone who could help me with this work, so I just, out of absolute desperation, I just wrote on my Facebook wall my work in 200 characters. Like, I'm doing this project in 200 characters. It's my MA, but hey. And people shared it who knew me, eventually people who didn't know me. And at that point, I joined so many groups on Facebook, which are like democracy, anti-communism, like things like that. So I repost that everywhere. And actually, I did my whole like oral history research because of that, because I reposted things on Facebook or someone reposted them and people start to contact me, and I started to like travel and meet people who I just like messaged on Facebook. Otherwise, I couldn't figure out a way to like, you know, meet or like reach actually survivors or families of victims.
Mm. Another interesting thing you mentioned is this oral history thing, and I was thinking how um, there's this thing in Romania that really interests me, um, that this transition period that I was speaking about um, is finished. It's a proper historical period, and it's been theorized and written about, and it starts in 1989 at the revolution, and it ends in 2007 when Romania and Bulgaria joined the European Union. But I went home and I met, friends, family, as you do when you go home. And I asked everybody this question: do you think the transition period ended? And this was last year before the pandemic, so January 2020, right? So 13 years after this period has theoretically, historically ended. And 100% of the people I asked said it didn't end. So, you know, there's obviously a huge gap between what historians conceive of the history and what people actually think of history. And again, this oral thing, right? Like I was just talking to my friends. I wasn't writing an academic account of people's memories. It was just a friendly conversation and kind of like mentally recording their answers.
Totally, I think both in that sense, but also in general, like I think conversations, like basically anything could be research in essence. Like as long as you can reflect on it and critically take it somewhere else, I think that's when it could kind of transform into research in the sense that, like, I mean, just talking to you over the years has been very like valuable for me in terms of my practice or writing. Just because it's another way of like figuring out things, also receiving knowledge about things that you may not know, and then reflecting back on them in relation to the work that you're making, even if that takes a very long span of time, which I think it's how it probably should happen.
Yeah, I guess the way I'm thinking about it is if you can put it at the end of your paper as a bibliographical source, it's traditional research. If you don't really want to do it because it looks dodgy, it's still research, but it's, artistic.
Yeah.
um, and thinking back to the immediate period after you graduated, how did you continue to do research then? What were some of the challenges to keep researching when you were freshly out of an academic institution that, where you had access to books? Unis usually pay for journals. What was it like to lose access to that?
I think that, of course, wasn't nice because after you graduate, you're like even poorer than as you were a student. So last thing you afford is like, buying expensive academic books, which only libraries own at the end of the day. I think at that point, I was just asking friends who are still at uni to like use their accounts on, libraries or whatever online and download papers for me, which I think people have asked me to do as well after they've graduated. So it's like, this thing that that close friends who like reading do for you, and you do that for them as well. Um, I think I was doing that, and I was able to like get an alumni card at uni and go and read books in the building, for example. Or again, I was asking people to take books for me from the library so I can read them. And I think it was the other thing is like all about like pirating on the web, which both of us like great doing, right, Laura?
Yeah, totally. I think it's actually, we should definitely talk about this because, um, yeah, there is this question of like ethics and fairness, and that some publishers should get paid for the content they put out. But then as an academic writer, do you get paid when you get your paper published in a journal? You don't really. The publisher takes, they make the profit and they take everything for themselves.
Yeah, even the editors of the journal don't get paid for their work. And the people who are peer reviewing your article don't get paid for peer reviewing it. It's just the publisher. And then, like, you spent a year writing an article, which is what I've just done and which is what I'm doing now as well. And you, like, invest your funds to do research and so on, and your time. And then you submit it to a journal, you pray that will be accepted. Only so you go through again the struggle of it being sent back for editing and so on, to not get paid, and for the people who are doing all the work to not get paid as well, but for you to get like it's almost like having exhibitions, right? Like you do all the work, you print the work, you bring it to the gallery, and then you're part of a specific, I don't know, classist society, or you're looked up upon because you have a show or you have a paper published, although that doesn't actually pay your rent at all.
Yeah, you just go home with all the nicely printed and framed photographs and you didn't sell anything. So now you're probably in debt to your parents.
Yeah, which is, I suppose, pretty much the capitalist neoliberal society we live in. So, like, quite ordinary for all of us. But yeah, I mean, going back to your question again, I think not question, but just the conversation of the sources that we research. I think one source which I've used outside of uni was like academia.edu, which is a website where researchers and academics and like art historians upload like papers, and you can download them for free. You can like search and type any keywords, and I think it's kind of a way to fight this journal situation where the journals cost so much and the articles cost so much if you are to buy them. Especially outside of like a library or an institution. So plenty of people who are published somewhere also upload their papers in academia, so you could actually have access. And I think ResearchGate is the other place that's pretty much like the same situation.
Yeah, or there's that group on Facebook where you can ask people with academic access to get papers for you if they can, which is really helpful. But actually,
Definitely.
I want to say that even when I was at the Royal College of Art, they, first arts university in the world and lousy access to resources, academic resources. And I pirated most of my sources because my lovely dissertation tutor invited me to ArgFail, which is actually not really available in the UK anymore unless you have a VPN, right?
Yeah, it's totally not available. Like it's really hard. Even if you manage to get in, it doesn't actually work anymore.
And that saved me truly. I had access to a lot of resources that the institution I was paying a huge fee for didn't have access. And actually, even when I was doing my BA, University of Westminster had amazing access, but for my dissertation, I came across a paper from a journal that they weren't paying for. And I really thought, that paper, there was a paragraph in it. That paragraph had an idea that would it would totally justify my argument in my paper. And I was like, I need access to that journal. And I decided to pay for a 24-hour access to get that paper and they gave access to me, and I went to see the paper, and it was horrible quality. You could barely make out the letters, the writing. It was so hard to make out the writing and to get what I wanted out of it. And you pay huge amounts of money to get access to these journals.
Yeah, totally. I think it's just really sad. It's kind of an unbreakable circle, like going for who knows how long. But we have like, I mean, that group on Facebook is great source for people, academics from all over the world, and researchers and artists and all kinds of people just searching for different papers or books. And it's actually nice because you could see a lot of books that like people request, which you wouldn't actually, search for yourself, but they could sound like interesting, so you would get them and discover like new information like that as well. And I'm just going to mention like the other great place to pirate from, Sci-Hub, where you can get any paper from the internet, from a journal, by like, putting the URL there, and it unlocks the paper for you, so you could actually do research. And I think there was some article actually that since this website was created, so much more papers were like used as references in general, like so much more of these things which stay kind of unlocked behind the journal's doors were actually used, which I suppose it's their main purpose, right? Like research is made so that it continues to be used, or like you make your work so that it pushes kind of a wave of things to happen in the aftermath of it, rather than to just keep it stored locked behind something and inaccessible.
The other one I use quite a lot actually is what's it called? I think it's Z Library. The link is b-ok.cc. I use this a lot because they have access to a huge archive of both books and articles. And they also have, so like they have a general search where you search for like the title, the writer, but they have a full text search. So you can like search for keywords and stuff. Really, really helpful, really amazing resource.
Yeah, and I just remembered Memory of the World, which is again like a website where you could download different books in PDF. Most of the time, it's quite good quality and like really, yeah, saving your life when you do research. Whether it's like written-based work or like artist-based work, it's always great to have sources.
And it's not about, paying money 100%. It's also about, if you live in London, you probably rent a room in a house. So your space is very, very limited. I have very limited space. I can't afford to buy a lot of books because I don't have anywhere to put them.
Totally, but also I think knowledge should be free.
That would
As
be
a
great,
radical
yeah.
activist. Yeah, that's even like radical as a thought, which is kind of sad, I suppose.
Although there are things that I'm very happy to pay for, like the Romanian books and photo books. I know these are tiny publishers who probably struggle to make ends meet, so I really like paying for those books and getting them in a physical format.
No, not totally. I think we should also say that there is a very big difference between supporting emerging artists or like emerging publishers and so on, and pirating from the web. Like very
Yeah,
big difference. And of course, yeah,
you
support for the
you only pirate the bad guys.
yeah yeah totally.
Um, yeah, well, I guess we talked a lot about a lot of aspects of research. So if there aren't any questions, if you don't have any other questions, we can wrap it.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think we've been on like a kind of a run with information, so I think it's probably good to like wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's good to mention that we won't have any lives next month in August. We want to take a little break and maybe think about what we want to do next and plan the next series maybe. But it would be great if people let us know if they enjoy the series and maybe if they gave us some more ideas about what they would like to see and to listen to. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That would be really helpful if we can get some suggestions of what's helpful in general.
Good. It was so great to talk to you.
Yeah, same.
So thank you everybody who joined us, and have a good night.
Yeah, good night, guys.